Your Dog Talk. I'm your host, Eric Gonzalez. And my four-legged companion, Canine Judah, and the infamous Arm, the engineer's infamous Arm. All right, so let's update everybody as to what's going on. We had we had a situation with the weather. Apparently, probably maybe the breakers or what have you gave us some problems with the computers. So we're looking into that. We actually had the issue again today, but we're looking forward to making sure that the show goes on. So we try to do the show on a weekly basis on Wednesday, 4:30 or so. Unfortunately, this is actually the second time we wound up doing it on a Thursday. What happens, glitches here and there as we continue to get comfortable with our setup and our equipment. We may have stuff like that occurring, but we want to make sure that you guys are privy to the classes, and rather than keeping you guys waiting, 2 weeks from the last show, we want to make sure that we keep it going, even if it causes us to all turn a day. So, thank you all for tuning in, checking in with us. And then Judah, let's go, Mark. It's good boy. How are you, bud? Bud as well. High five. That's a good boy. Cover. Over here, cover. Be comfortable. That's a good boy. That's what's up. That's what's up. Good. Back. Good. All right. So last week we went into a few questions that was asked of us, and so what's gonna happen is throughout the week or what have you, you guys can ask questions, and by doing so, what we'll do is we'll put it on a list, and hopefully in a timely fashion we'll get to your questions. What happens is sometimes I may want to go through the questionnaires quicker, and what happens based on just the topic in itself, it might cause us to wind up going further than expected on one topic, thus delaying a specific question that you may be showing attentiveness to. So for example, we had several questions last week, about 8 or so, and we kind of got to about 3 of them pertaining food or what have you. That being said, there was actually 2 more areas that I noticed we didn't touch pertaining to food, and I'll play with it briefly, not exactly knowing the content of what you're asking, but I'll touch it to the best of my ability. So last week, the general questions wound up confining the information to food, dietary intake, or what have you. And so I noticed that we had 2 more questions pertaining to that. Now, we are on a time strain, so currently we are like at a 25-minute in general. Sometimes we'll overlap a little bit, but if anything, we'll always catch up on the following episode, because we want to make sure that the information is intriguing enough for you to come back. We don't want to bore you or what have you. There's a lot of information out there, but a lot of people ask and inquire because they want to know how Bite Life does what we do. And so for that reason, we want to make sure to adhere to your request, and therefore give you knowledgeable or credible information, or information that will help you and your four-legged companion as we go throughout our relationship in educating, helping you in what I passionately love to do. I want to welcome everybody that's live. We're live on YouTube, as well as we're live on our Instagram page, and we're here looking forward to bless. Listen, at the end of the day, make sure that any questions you have, if you don't give them to us throughout the day, if you do, we may or may not be able to get to it, because we have a list. But please feel free throughout the week to continue to forward the information as questions continue to pop up with you and your four-legged companion, and or yours or your friends or your family members or what have you. All right, so we talked a little bit about last week about feeding your dog the kibble versus the raw brands or what have you, and we kind of went into what we prefer as an individual and or as a company. The 2 other areas that we didn't touch on, people were asking about food refusal, if I can kind of give them an understanding on food refusal. Food refusal, for me, is basically confined to a sports situation, in the sense that there are certain sports that require such of a requirement, all right? Food refusal, when it comes to the Europeans looking at how Americans do, like, for example, guard dog services, a lot of testimonies come back that they think we're crazy, because at the end of the day, whereas a dog can be trained and encouraged to ignore a piece of meat for a training scenario, such as in KMPV or what have you, um, realistically, it is something that is believed that the dog will eventually violate, continue. There's nobody that's supervising or watching them. What you got to keep in mind about the dog is that the dog in general, the canine breed in general, they're carnivores. So as carnivores, meat is obviously going to be appealing to them. So it's important to understand that if I throw a piece of steak there, though he was encouraged not to touch it, for the moment, if you leave a piece of steak on the ground, for hours at a time, maybe a day or past or what have you, the dog is eventually going to revert back to its nature, and the dog can get poisoned or what have you. And therefore, a lot of the Europeans are under the impression that Americans are crazy, because we do have a lot of guard dog services that do put these animals in parking lots or what have you for business purposes, whether it be a car lot, like a car dealership, secured, businesses that require such protection for the sake of protecting properties or what have you, be it vehicles, boats, or what have you, whatever type of business it may be. And so again, it's an industry that it is perceived to be not so. We're considered somewhat, what is it called, like naive to think that a carnivore will not eventually eat meat. So as far as food refusal, yes, it can be taught. We do it often, primarily for presentation purposes and or for a specific sport. But again, I will not bet my life on a dog refusing it indefinitely, because it's unrealistic. Now, how do we get the dog to refuse food? A lot of it has to do with physical manipulation, whether it be prong collars, electric collars, or what have you. It definitely be done. But it's if you're asking for the purpose of creating it as an indefinite response, it's unrealistic. Okay? And I'm going to agree with the European doctrine on it, that is something that's not realistic. For the moment, yes. For sport purposes, yes. For presentation, yes, it's okay. But to put a carnivore to refuse meat, you know what I'm saying? It can only be for a temporary period before the dog actually allows its nature to kick in. I hope that answered the question pertaining to that. So that was one of the questions pertaining food, as well as the other question dealing with food is luring. People were asking about luring. What is luring? So luring is basically allowing you to manipulate the animal in the directions and or behavior that you desire by way of teasing the animal by something that is desiring, such as food. Dog needs to eat. There are dogs that are prey driven, so a prey item such as a bouncing ball, frisbee, or what have you, something that's mobile, is also a nice tool that can be utilized. And so luring is just exactly that, luring the animal to and from. We get dogs to do all kind of things, like primarily, like let's say skateboarding or what have you. People, ask me, how do I do it? It's all by enticing the animal. For example, I'll mark an animal, or I'll mark a dog onto a skateboard as if it were a mark. Initially, is on a stationary perspective. How am I going to get the dog on there? First and foremost, since I got the dog acclimated to the mark, I'm going to get the dog acclimated to the skateboard by minimizing the movement of the skateboard. So it'll be a slight elevation, the dog is comfortable, and then I'm going to start enticing the animal. I'm going to start enticing the animal with a little bit of movement, and the dog initially may come off, but the objective is to lure the animal back on, and or through the destruction of the movement by way of the food and or ball, toy, or what have you that you're using to lure the animal. All right. So when I encourage, or when I'm teaching people how to communicate with animals, what I usually say is there's three factors. You have verbiage, you have body gesture, and you have equipment. Equipment can be physical equipment like prongs and chains and what have you, as well as your food. All of that plays part of your equipment. Then your body gesture is what allows you to get into the luring principle of what's happening. For example, if I have a piece of meat or something on me, and I'm enticing the animal, just by allowing the dog to follow my hand is an act of luring. If I want the dog to come, I'm going to mobilize myself backwards, enticing the animal that I have something, walking backward after a few steps, rewarding the animal. So I'm luring the animal by my body gesture, right? So proper communication again would be verbiage, equipment, which is physical equipment like prong collars, such as prong collars and or food or what have you. And then, your verbiage, your equipment, and your body language. Body language plays a major factor. So, for example, if I have a mark in a specific area and I see that the dog is having a brief mishap in comprehending as what I'm asking the animal to do, I may kind of like walk in the direction as an act of luring the animal into the position and direction that I want, right? So luring deals with that, luring the animal by enticing the animal with something that it desires that you have control of that'll get the dog to execute the command in question. All right? So that's what we're dealing when it comes to luring. All right? So as of last week and pertaining to these two questions that I just answered, all of that is confined to food manipulation or food in general. And so I hope that was beneficial for you. All right. So another question that was asked of me is they want to know about what is it that they want to know about? They want to know about the athletic build of the animal. So talking a little bit about the athletic build of the animal, it's interesting because most dogs, as far as athleticism, you're dealing with genetics in many instances and in most instances. Now we currently have a big movement when it comes to bulldogs, bully type breeds, exotic bullies or what have you. And so what happens is they're creating like these overgrown small breeds with these excessive muscles. A lot of that has to do with genetics. As far as breeding these dogs, where they literally look like bodybuilders, and they're, besides looking like bodybuilders, I mean, a lot of them have health conditions or what have you because of just many irresponsible breeding or what have you. Dogs that have an excessive amount of muscle and have minimal function. Right? Not all dogs and not all breeds and not all exotics, but in many instances there are those concerns. As far as my personal experience with conditioning dogs, besides taking into consideration the genetic issues, is my experiences with my dogs. I've had several demo dogs, and I have a regimen on how I condition them. I have a dog, as you all know, Canine Judah. Judah, Fui, stand. Fui, stand. Circle. I don't know if you can really tell by looking at him there, but Judah is very down. Judah is considered very conditioned for his size, all right? Now, as the breed, as the Dutch Shepherd, he's a runt of his litter. So he's actually small for the standard Dutch Shepherd. But for his build, he's very conditioned. And so what happens is, it's about how you feed the animal at a young age and or condition them. Now, my conditioning, I usually wait because of potential hip problems that can occur by too much pressure on the joints or what have you. I usually wait till the dog is about a year, I would say a year to 14 months. Usually for some reason I got 14 months stuck in me. I don't know what I came across many years ago, but for some reason I got 14 months stuck in my brain. And so I personally wait till the dog is about 14 months so that a lot of his joints are set in place before I start conditioning him. Now my conditioning is I allow the dog to do a lot of pulling. So what I'll do is I do stuff like I'll get a tire, I'll prepare it where it's attached to a harness, with some distance or what have you, and I'll put the dog to actually just heel while dragging a tire or what have you. So that's one of my primary means of conditioning. I also have a chain that's actually a 10-pound chain. This chain is not a chain that you can obtain at a local Home Depot or what have you. It's actually a chain that you get by way of like a marine type of store. In other words, this is a chain that's intended to for boats, for ships, for yachts. These are chains that they actually use to put anchors to, keep vessels as big as yachts or what have you, or ships from being tossed to and fro from the winds or what have you. So this little chain, it has maybe I think 17 links on it. These representing a link. These individual links right here, there's about 17 of them, which is equivalent to about 10 pounds in weight. So what I do for conditioning purposes with my dogs is I'll put it on them, for short periods of time, especially in the beginning as they get acclimated to the equipment. But this is something that I've conditioned Judah to the point where he'll run, sprint, and even catch a frisbee if I throw it with it on. Now, as he's getting older, he'll be 7 years old now in July actually, July 2nd, if I'm not mistaken. He'll be 7 years old. It's not the type of conditioning that I do right now as far as having him sprint, run, flying, whatever. But I may put it on him for maybe 15, 20 minutes, maybe even an hour at times, just to kind of walk around and just kind of, maybe get on a simple, pretty position in that it allows him to get on his hind legs or what have you. And so what happens is because Judah can easily get on to sit pretty, I'm building rear as well as I can get him to do a paw stand. I can actually build his shoulders. So as you guys seen in the past throughout my pictures or what have you, where I can have Judah sit, walk backwards, climb on a wall, and stand on and be on a paw stand like a handstand. I sometimes do it with the chain on, with the intent of building his front shoulders. And so what happens is days, weeks, and months of that behavior, maybe not consecutively, but days, weeks, and months of that, you're eventually going to get a conditioned animal. And when you do condition an animal as such, and with the proper diet or what have you, and as I mentioned last week about diet, I want to make sure as carnivores that they consume a lot of real meat, a lot of real protein, because a lot of the protein that the dog foods offer, it's a vegetarian protein because they've replaced the grain products with a chickpea. Your chickpea is actually the protein that they're offering the animal. And so when you come across the chicken flavor and the beef flavors, it's usually a broth that they're actually adding to it to give it that flavor, but it's not actual meat in most of your bags. Not every bag, but in most of your bags. So you want to make sure that when you're conditioning an animal, even yourself, when you're conditioning yourself, a proper diet will be carbon up throughout the day, protein at night to restore the muscle breakdown that occurred while you were working throughout the day through the energy of the carb. So I tell people what you want to do, especially a lot of breeders when they ask my advice, if they want to raise healthy puppies, grain food throughout the day, dry dog food or what have you, with whatever protein that's irrelevant to me, I add the protein at nighttime. Because whatever the dog did running around throughout the day, it needs to restore the breakdown of the muscles by way of consuming protein. All right, so whether it's you as an individual and or your dog, you want to make sure that you have a balanced meal. You have a balanced meal, and that the balanced meal consists of carbs and protein. And I will break it down when most of my protein will be consumed at nighttime versus the day when I'm giving the dog. So if my dog is working throughout the day with the equipment, this, that, whatever, in the evening I want to make sure that he eats extremely well, especially if I've conditioned him with pulling tires or what have you, and or having the chain around him like I like to do. Because again, it builds muscles. But if you have a muscle breakdown and you don't give him a proper diet, you're not going to get a proper build or what have you. And that's important to comprehend and understand when you're dealing with conditioning a dog, whereas you have control of that. What I find when you have dogs that are raised in open fields or whatever, a lot of times they tend to develop a lot better because of the muscle tension that they're putting through the running back and forth, and with a proper diet is going to pay off. Okay, it will definitely pay off. I know a lot of breeders, some breeders that confine their animals to crates or what have you, or limited space, and then I have breeders that have their dogs in open forums where the dogs run free. And when the dogs run free, it's more healthier for the animal. Now that being said, let me just say this. Whenever you put an animal, even a domesticated animal, especially dogs like working dogs like shepherds, whether it be Dutch Shepherd, German Shepherds, Malinois, or what have you, a lot of working breeds, when you put them in an open forum, like the wild has to offer, like nature has to offer them, a lot of times the wild instinct kicks in. You got to be careful with that, because you'll see the pack instinct kick in. Next thing you know, you know, with that setup as a permanent setup, a lot of times you'll find dogs that'll be extremely injured, if not killed, by other pack members because the pack instinct kicks in. To deal with a domesticated animal and keep the domestication as a main factor, you want to make sure that you keep the animal domesticated, unfortunately, whereas, the house setting, the crates, the confinements of the marks or what have you. Because again, if a dog kicks into its nature by having the liberty, and primarily not when it's alone, but when it's with other members, you have a tendency of the pack instinct kicking in, and that could be liable and dangerous in that you're losing money by losing puppies and or other dogs because of that instinct. So again, they're domesticated for a purpose. Right, guys? So that's important to understand. Anything else, hit me back up. If there's anything else pertaining to that, I will definitely bring it to light. As far as athletic build or anything like that, is there any questions you may have? I'm talking to the hand, people. Talking to the hand. All right, so he has a small dog. She's not ready for that. But listen, even a small dog, I remember when I was working with, not working, but when I was mentoring a crew of trainers that were actually part of a circus. I remember part of the circus show was a gentleman that had the fastest dogs in the industry, and for that reason they were eligible to be part of the circus because it was a circus pertaining dogs alone. And so those dogs, I think they were little rat terriers or what have you, and what the owner of those dogs would do, he would actually put like little vests on them with little microscopic type weights. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you pick it up as a human being, it's like nothing. But for dogs, small little dogs that were, 7, 8, 10 pounds, that made a world of a difference. And so what he would do is he would put them in a training regimen so that when the equipment was off, the speed was ridiculous. Do you know what I'm saying? So even if you have small dogs, and you're into conditioning the animals or what have you, it can be done with a rat terrier, like if it were a German Shepherd or what have you. So especially you people that are out there that are very fitness oriented or what have you, and let's say you're runners, joggers or whatever, and you have a certain pace and you feel maybe your dog doesn't keep up or whatever, you can do little drills like that where you can add weight to the animal. Again, not weight that'll be, liable, to the animal's health or what have you, but you want to be able to add, be creative. You know what I'm saying? As long as you can keep the dog safe and you can create speed by doing little things like that, would be extremely ideal. I've had Judah on vests that had actual slips of sandbags or what have you, or actual metal weights where, once he had it on, he would perform at a certain pace. Once it was off, he would do it in a more rapid pace. I remember one time I was conditioning the animal with some of my secrets, and I remember taking him to an old training scenario that we kind of repeated, and it was night and day from when I previously did it without conditioning, and then when I did it with conditioning. I remember he came in so hard, hit the person, it took the guy's air out, and it was a short distance. Why? Because he came faster with more strength and more power because of the conditioning that was occurring behind closed doors. That was a wake-up call for the individual once, we did it without the equipment. So the conditioning is definitely important or what have you. Swimming, extremely ideal. I believe in swimming a lot. I remember at the time when I had access to pools or what have you, more when I was, in residential settings where I had pools, I would actually heel my dog around the pool to the point that I was healing them, in the beginning, 2-3 times, depending on the size of the pool. But I remember that there were times when I would just go around, 40 plus times because, I'm monitoring the animal, making sure the animal remains safe. But it was a matter of conditioning. So it wasn't something we did suddenly. It was something that we did. We gradually build up to it. For example, you walk around the dog in the beginning, they're a little discombobulated in the way they, they perform. You can tell that they're not used to it. But repetition is the key to the success when it comes to getting an animal to understand what is required. All right? That being said, we're down to 1 minute and 49 seconds. And so we have a couple of more questions here. I think there was a question posed here. So I got a question from 305 Dog Training. Would you recommend using food to teach a dog to loose leash, walk, or heel? I've heard some trainers say they don't like to use food to teach walking. Again, and I would agree. A lot of people don't like the food concept, but I like to use logic behind everything that I say or do. When it comes to food, the puppy is born pursuing mom for the dam for breast milk. All right. If I take a hen and I throw her in the middle of traffic, and her little chicks are with her, they're gonna pursue her. Why? What is the influence? It's the primary influence is the food that she supplies to them during this time of them needing it. They have difficulty obtaining the food independently, so she teaches them, right? And so a lot of trainers refuse the food concept. I don't agree with it as an indefinite journey in your training. I believe you should wean the dog off, but I believe it's something that we should start our dogs with. Now, for example, when it comes to Judah, based on our experience, Judah's the type of dog that if in the beginning everything was food, 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 food. But then I learned with Judah that when he got frustrated, he would go into avoidance and he would avoid the food completely. And in doing so, what I would do is I would have to sit back and analyze the situation, because food is a major key, a major tool for your training. So if he loses that, what can we do? There are two things that we can capitalize on. Primarily, the dogs in general are prey-driven animals. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to allow the animal to lose interest in the food, which is my stationary reward, and or your mobile reward, which will be your prey factor. You're throwing of your frisbee, you're throwing of your ball, or what have you. So when it comes to him, I do start with food, but if I see him getting beside himself, getting attitude, refusing, or just getting stubborn, what I'll do is I may compulsion train him through a short period, give him a break, knowing that the food is not gonna get it through. I'm still gonna get what I want. I'm gonna push him through it. So food is not working suddenly because he got stressed out or whatever. I'm a compulsion train him briefly. Now this is him as this individual dog. Not every dog is the same, and it all has to do with what you've done in the conditioning. When it comes to once I realize that he's already stressed out and food is not working, what I'm then gonna do is give him about a 10-minute break, and then I'm gonna introduce my toy or my mobile reward, whether it be a ball or frisbee or what have you, and I'm gonna ignite him from that compulsion that I just put him through. In other words, the stress level I just put him through, I'm gonna make sure that I detach myself from that, but not give up, continue to work through it, but in a more positive. So what I find with Judah, and I find with many dogs, and I give this advice, is as long as you can compartmentalize your stationary reward with your mobile reward and not overwhelm the dog with both, but know how to play with them. If he shuts down on one, you should be able to empower him with the other one. He shuts down on the food, give him a break, and then activate him with the mobile. And remember, dogs are energy driven. So if the energy of the ball is bouncing, brown, 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 or the frisbee is flying and gliding, all of that's going to activate the energy and mobility. Whereas a food, I drop it, it's there, or it's in my hand, it ain't doing anything. It's a stationary reward versus a mobile reward. So if I'm healing the animal, I'm gonna again start with food. If there's a little bit of stress, preferably I'm gonna get a ball, put it under my pit right here, or get a frisbee or something to entice the animal to re-energize himself to perform the exercise, whether it be healing or anything like that. And again, listen, there's a lot of people that use different methods, and I always say I'm not the all in all, but I've had some success throughout my 20 plus years in the industry, and I appreciate the humility of people giving me that opportunity to remain humble by allowing me to speak into your life or what have you in the profession in that I so love and embrace. So again, had it not been for Judah and or several other demo dogs that I have, people wouldn't know me. You know what I'm saying? I tell my breeders, I tell my trainers, you need a demo dog. Shh, let your dog talk. That's what this show is all about. Shut up, let your dog talk. All right, so again, thank you all for tuning in. We're already out of time. We do have several questions. Again, listen, please continue to ask questions. I would like to add it to the episode. Keeps us going, keeps us busy, keeps answering your question as well as the questions of many that are out there across our nation and or the world. And if I could but at least give you one point that you can run with and be successful with, I've done my job. All right, guys. So again, thank you for tuning in. Looking forward to next week. I got people asking me questions about clickers or what have you. We're going to get into all of that. But continue sending the questions. I know I got another list of questions I haven't added to the list, but there's a lot of questions coming in. I want to answer your questions according to how we do life here in Bite Life and or throughout the podcast. So ask your question. The sooner you ask the question, the sooner I'll get to it. Again, I may have 10 questions, may want to get to all of them, but might only get to 2 or 3 of them. So the sooner you ask questions, listen, no question is a dumb question. It's all about learning. It's all about, there's nothing like information. They said the two greatest things people pay for is speed and information. And I'm here to give information because I love what I do and I want to help all of you succeed with your 4-day companions. All right, guys? Appreciate you. Take care. YouTube, we'll do it again next week, Wednesday. All right? And the hand, the infamous hand, our engineer. Any questions before we shoot up? No questions. He's happy. I'm happy. All right? So